In Washington, the war is over.
For the first time in 9 years, there are no Americans fighting in Iraq. After a decade of war that's cost us thousands of lives and over $1 trillion, the nation we need to build is our own.
In keeping with the presidential campaign promise, the United States is moving on.
Iraq is no more a problem. Iraq is rebuilding itself. Iraq has become partially stable.
The major resource for economic development is the development of the oil industry. These contracts have been signed. They are very good contracts.
A bright economic future, a functioning democracy. That's the message out of Baghdad's international zone, where Iraq's government now sits. It's a different era from when I first arrived in Iraq a few weeks after the US-led invasion, and the years I stayed on to report what came afterwards.
When I was last here, this place was called the Green Zone, and there were American soldiers everywhere. You could see them at checkpoints, jogging around this entire compound. Now you don't see US troops here at all, and the one clear presence that the US does have, its huge embassy, one of the largest in the world, now looks set for a downsizing.
After nearly a decade of occupation and nation building, the US has pulled back. It's withdrawn its military, and by the end of this year, US spending here will be just 5% of what it was at its peak, the year President Obama was running for office.
Our feeling here in Iraq that the Americans are worried about their election. They just want to have the election and then they will think about Iraq afterward.
With another US election just months away, I'm returning with the Fault Lines team to travel across Iraq, from south to north, to take the pulse of a country and its people after the Americans. It's been 5 years since I was last in Iraq. Back then, coalition troops were still deployed in the southern city of Basra. The military has left, but many of the British soldiers who were based here have stayed on. This time, they're here for the money. Business is booming for their clients too. Iraq is pumping record amounts of oil, and production contracts to develop the country's massive southern oil fields have been auctioned off to foreign companies.
There's many Chinese companies here because Iraq is becoming better and better.
You think?
Yes, I think.
Why?
The war finished and America is go home. Yes, and more other companies come here.
China's National Petroleum Corporation has partnered with British giant BP to develop the Rumaila oil field, the largest in Iraq. Newly arrived Chinese oil workers and other foreign employees meet their security details in this car park at Basra Airport. For us too, a private security escort is still obligatory, and this is ours. Basra was the first city to fall in the 2003 US-led invasion. I came here that summer to report on angry protests that had broken out against the lack of electricity. Today, there isn't much improvement in the basic services people were protesting for 9 years ago. Basra still suffers power cuts. Unemployment also is widespread here. Almost a quarter of people under 30 don't have jobs. And while there are signs of new money flowing in, the cost of living is rising fast.
هم تحت ذريعة الديمقراطية دخلوا طيب وهم خلصونا من نظام أكيد ديكتاتوري طيب ولكن في نفس الوقت فرزت في المرحلة مشاكل عويصة مشاكل كبيرة جدا واجهها الشعب.
For 9 years, union leader Hashmeya al-Sadawi has fought to keep Iraq's oil wealth flowing to Iraqis, not just to foreign companies. Iraq's Deputy Prime Minister for Energy says that the deals the government has signed with foreign investors are reaping rewards.
We have already increased our production to 3 million barrels per day, and during this year we'll add another 500,000 or more barrels per day. So the progress is there.
But despite record output, in Basra there's frustration that companies developing the fields are importing labour, and that there is no meaningful legislation to protect Iraqi jobs.
خلي تجيبون وياهم عمالة أجنبية، ولكن العمالة الأجنبية قد تعتمد تكون خبراء. أنا أجيب لي عامل، ليش مو عندنا العمال اللي ما عندهم خبرة؟ ليش أجيب لي عامل من برا؟ جيب خبير أنت تحتاجه، نعم، وعلى شرط أن عمالنا تتدرب خلال هاي الفترة مع الشركة الأجنبية.
Sadawi says it was the US decision to dismantle Iraq's army and national industries in the name of de-Baathification that caused widespread unemployment and created a large pool of angry men ready to take up arms.
أكو عناصر في الجيش العراقي بدل من أن يكون هو المساند للشعب العراقي فحقد لأنه امتيازاته كلها خسرها، أصبح من كان هو يشتغل براتب محترم أصبح عاطل.
From Basra, we drive north toward Najaf, along a road lined with symbols that commemorate a battle lost and injustice done. The cemetery of Wadi al-Salam, or Valley of Peace, surrounds the city. It is possibly the largest burial ground in the world, and the final resting place to which many Shia aspire.
The scale of this place is absolutely breathtaking. For 14 centuries, Shia from all over the world have been bringing their dead to be buried here. It's so immense that in Najaf they say their city is half for the living and half for the dead.
In 2004, the serenity of the Valley of Peace was violated. That spring, fighters loyal to Muqtada al-Sadr, the son of one of Iraq's most revered Shia clerics, fought US forces in Baghdad and the holy cities of Karbala, Kufa, and here in Najaf.
The RPG?
Yes, RPG. Yes, our body.
And landed. Yeah?
Yes.
Destroyed everything.
At the beginning of August, trying to root out Sadr's Mahdi army and take control of Najaf, US Marines invaded the cemetery.
We've been taken into a part of the graveyard where you can actually see the destruction from the fighting that took place in 2004. There's RPG holes in the walls. Some of these graves are completely destroyed. I remember speaking to Iraqis at the time who simply couldn't believe that things had deteriorated to such an extent that this, one of the most holy and sacred sites in all of Iraq, had turned into a battleground between the Mahdi army and the Americans.
Hundreds of Mahdi fighters died in the battle. In a new section of the cemetery, built for Sadr's followers killed in the uprisings and sectarian violence that the US-led occupation provoked, families come to honor their dead. No one knows how many Iraqis have been killed since the invasion. Estimates range from more than 150,000 to over 1 million. For years, the US claimed not to keep a body count. But there are some 6,000 graves in this cemetery alone, where the grief seems impossible to bury. Ali Shaka Saddam's mother died during the violence in 2004. His brother is buried here in the section reserved for those killed by US forces.
وكنت أتمنى أن أكون في ركبهم. إني حرمت من انتفاضة النجف وانتفاضة الكوفة، وحتى الآن أرجو أن يرزقني هكذا ربي لمقاتلة هؤلاء المبغضون الذين أساءوا لنا وسرقوا مقدراتنا، سرقوا حتى آثارنا، دمروا حتى آثارنا.
These were the people the US military expected to welcome them. But they soon made enemies of people like Ali and his family.
لكن عندما وإن كان لنا هاجس أن المحتل لا يكون محررنا أبدا، لكننا انتظرنا لفترة أشهر ورأينا بأعيننا كيف كانوا يسحقون على رؤوس العراقيين وكيف يتجاوزون على النساء وكيف ويقودهم وأداتهم أقول العملاء الذين جاءوا بركبهم.
In America, they think this is over.
المحتل رحل وآثاره باقية. آثاره كل يوم تنكجره، كل يوم تجري دموعنا.
Muqtada al-Sadr's followers listened to him deliver some of his most incendiary sermons against the occupation here, at his base in the nearby city of Kufa. Now, Sadr spends much of his time in Iran, and on this Friday he isn't here. But the message is political, populist, and doesn't shy away from criticizing the government in Baghdad.
وما نشاهده في السنين الأخيرة من استمرار القوى السياسية بالصراعات من أجل مصالح فئوية وشخصية والإهمال الكبير في جوانب مهمة وكثيرة.
The sermon addresses the deepening conflict between Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki's party and opposition blocs that has virtually paralyzed parliament for months.
وأبرزها الجانب الخدمي والأمني.
Over the years, Sadr has cultivated the image of an independent champion of the dispossessed Shia who make up his base. And he's transformed himself from a leader of a militia into the leader of a political party, an important one on which Maliki relies to maintain power. For years, Saddam Hussein had banned public celebrations of Shia festivals and limited the flow of Iranian pilgrims to Najaf. Now the pilgrims and tourists are back, prompting a boom in trade and hotel development. And there are unconfirmed reports that Iran is planning to spend $1 billion to refurbish the Imam Ali shrine. After decades of being victims, the Shia majority in Iraq have emerged the victors. A Shia now holds the top post of Prime Minister and Commander-in-Chief, and government positions are distributed according to ethnic and sectarian quotas. The new balance of power in Iraq has raised fears that Iran's influence is growing, both in Baghdad and here in Najaf. Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani is the top spiritual guide for Iraqi Shia and the leader of the school of clerics that guard this shrine. Early in the occupation, he demanded the US organized direct elections while opposing Iranian-style theocratic governance. But Sistani is 81 years old, and there are reports that Iran is campaigning to have one of their ayatollahs succeed him.
All the time that we were walking around inside the shrine, we were being very closely watched by the media team. And one of the most interesting things that they told us is that we specifically shouldn't focus on any Iranians.
The clerics here, like Shia Iraqis throughout the country, are defensive about the insinuation that Iran is taking over. In Iraq these days, regional ambitions run like undercurrents, reshaping the country. But over the past 9 years, political violence has literally refashioned the landscape.
I haven't been back to Baghdad in about 5 years, and we're only just entering the city, but immediately the first thing that strikes you as you drive in is one thing that's really changed: these walls.
Baghdad is battle-scarred and sectioned off by blast walls that were raised first around government ministries and military bases, then around hotels filled with foreigners, and then, as sectarian attacks escalated, around neighborhoods. The city was reconfigured as Iraqis fled mixed areas for the relative safety of religious and ethnically homogeneous enclaves. Harboring the wounds and stories of the bloodshed the occupation unleashed, many remain there, protected by concrete walls, checkpoints, and each other. More than 1.3 million people across Iraq are still displaced. And in Baghdad, almost 500,000 remain in camps like this one, on the edge of the Shia neighborhood of Kadamiyah. Abu Sajjad's family was living in Talmiyah, a Sunni neighborhood north of Baghdad where resistance to the occupation was fierce. Al-Qaeda also found a home there, as it chased others out.
بالليل يعني اوراق مكتوبه يذبونها الصبح تلقاها بالباب بالشارع ما ادري شنو.
When the family fled, they left everything behind and squatted here. And although they live in constant fear of eviction, they say they can't return to Tamir.
اكو ناس يعني احزاب يعني موجوده، الاحزاب بالعراق هي مستفاده يعني وعصابات. عصابات شنو العصابات؟ يعني حد قوه. يعني انا عندي حزب عنده قوه، اقدر اقتل واذبح واجيب واسلب وانا. ما اكو غيره. الفقير ضايع. قبل ولا هسه؟
In the Sunni neighbourhood of Gazaliya, where they came to escape threats from the Mahdi army in 2006, Hannah Naif and her mother-in-law are struggling to care for their household, including Hannah's 2 kids. Like almost 1 in 10 women in Iraq, they are widows. Hannah's husband Hussein was killed by US forces during a raid on a market in 2005. She had just learned she was pregnant with their second child, Abdullah.
خربطت بالباب ما ادري يعني شنو بالدنيا، بس كانوا يقنعوني بان هو مصور لحد الليل. يلا قالوا لي يعني ما تتصور شنو حالتي كانت، مثل يعني صدمه مو طبيعيه ما تتوصف.
حتى الطفل ردت تذبه
بدايه يعني الطفل الثاني حتى ارتذبه، بعدين استغفرت يعني رب العالمين وهذا التهيت فيهم، بس يعني ما انسى ابد يعني هذا اليوم اني.
2 years later, Madia's second son, Nouri, was killed in a militia attack. The family lost another breadwinner, and bureaucracy has made it difficult for them to get the support payment the government extends to widows.
What's the legacy that they think the US has here?
خلفونا الدمار يوم، دمار شامل. أنا من الدمار شامل صابنا احنا هنا. حكومة ظالمة ما تسأل عن المحتاج ولا يعني يعني حتى معاملة بالدولة احنا ما تمشينا ماكو.
صحيح النظام السابق كان مدينة يعني وزارة، بس يمكن النظام السابق يعني زادت على مأساته. كان يموت واحد يموت، هسه يموتون 100.
شو انظر لهم يعني اتمنى انا يعني عندي يعني سلطة، اتمنى يعني ما ادري لو اعرف افجر نفسي بيهم انا لهالدرجة يعني ما يخالف استغنى، بس يعني اشوف يتأذون يعني ما يخالف.
إذا ادعوا لك ديمقراطية إذا هم سلبوا الديمقراطية من الوجود، إذا ادعوا لك حرية إذا هم استعبدوك. فكل اللي جاي يكون على أمر الواقع عندنا هنا هو نقيض كامل لما يدعون من شعارات، مجرد شعارات لتغطية إباحتهم لكل حقوق الإنسان.
Qasim Mehdi Halas spent 7 months in US custody at Abu Ghraib prison and more than a year and a half in other US-run detention camps. He has testified to US military investigators that at Abu Ghraib he was stripped and paraded naked with a sack over his head, dressed in women's underwear, cuffed and hung from a window frame for hours when he asked to pray, and beaten into unconsciousness.
من تهديد بانه راح نسجن النساء نجيبها هنا نعذبها، من التهديد بالاغتصاب يعني الي والكل المعتقلين، يعني حتى انه تهديد لا تتصوره مجرد كلام. يعني انا بوحده من عندهن الحالات شاهدت اغتصاب طفل جابوه اغتصبوه امامي.
He says it was part of US interrogators' strategy as they tried to quell resistance that the US termed terrorism, detaining people across the country, especially those from Sunni areas.
كانوا يردون من عندي اسماء ناس يعني شلون اقول لك يعني حي الله ناس، يعني اي ناس انطينا اسماء اي ناس زين، وبعد كل تحقيق يبدي المسلسل مال التعذيب.
And the types of regions that they used to target in 2003, 2004.
نفس واغراض اخرى.
Over the past year, human rights groups have reported that Iraqi government security forces have conducted sweeps, preemptively arresting hundreds of people, detaining and sometimes torturing them in secret prisons inside the international zone. Some are the same people who were detained by the Americans and were accused of being terrorists then. Many live in Sunni areas in and around Baghdad, from where armed groups still orchestrate attacks. The government says there are no secret prisons.
I could say that there is no secret detention, so we welcome now Human Rights Watch, Amnesty Organization and United Nations Organization to come and to check and to find out whether there is a secret detention center in Iraq.
But the arrests have fueled the perception in communities like this one that the government is targeting them, much like US forces used to. We've come for Friday prayer in Adamir, a Sunni neighbourhood that for many years was an important centre of anti-occupation resistance. Getting here hasn't been easy.
We're currently being stopped from getting access to the main mosque in Adamir by a police checkpoint, and further down the street are soldiers too. Our security guards currently negotiating with them to get approval for something we already have approval to do.
And when prayers are over, no one here is willing to speak to us.
People here are definitely scared to speak on camera. They're saying that if they talk to us, they think they'll be arrested down the line. And we've now been told that we're not allowed to film anywhere outside the compound around Adamir Mosque. The guards have taken down the details of our security guards and said that if we go outside that gate and start filming, we'll be arrested.
I can't speak, but many people, if you want to bring them here and make an interview with them, they cannot talk. Because if they talk, they will be taken to be detained maybe 24 hours, 40 hours, 48 hours late.
Deputy Prime Minister Salah al-Mutlaq tells us that the fear we've felt in Adamir is warranted. He receives frequent reports that those arrested face extortion by security forces.
When they are going to go to the trial, they have to pay money in order to go to the trial. Otherwise, they will not be trialed and they will stay for another 10 years.
Mutlaq's duties as the Sunni Deputy Prime Minister were temporarily suspended shortly after US troops withdrew in December, and after he called Prime Minister Maliki a dictator.
Iraq cannot be run by one party and one man, especially when it was based on sectarianism.
But there are many political parties that exist. There were elections held here. There are ministries controlled by different ministers. This isn't a dictatorship.
Who is running the Ministry of Defense? Who is running the Ministry of Interior? Who is running the intelligence? Who is running all the security departments in this country? It's one man.
We're going to meet someone who says he never sleeps in the same place for more than a couple of nights. Uday al-Zaidi is a leader of the popular movement to save Iraq, a group that helped bring thousands of people into Baghdad's Tahrir Square on February the 25th, 2011, as uprisings in Tunisia and Egypt were unfolding. As well as demanding jobs and basic services, they protested Iraq's system of sectarian governance, which Zaidi blames the US for setting up.
بدأوا عملية سياسية على المحاصصة الطائفية، يعني رئيس الوزراء يجب أن يكون شيعي، ورئيس البرلمان سني، والرئيس الجمهورية كردي. احنا نريد نغير كل هذا. تبعات الاحتلال الأمريكي نريدها تتغير، نعود إلى دستور وطني لا يفرق بين مذهب ومذهب ولا دين وقومية.
Zaidi was among those detained by government security forces in the crackdown that followed the February protest. He shows us evidence of having been beaten. In spite of the repression, he and many other protesters have continued trying to gather peacefully every Friday. They don't want to give the government any pretext to use anti-terror legislation to shut them down.
يعني كثير من العراقيين قتلوا، لذلك أردنا أن نغلق الطريق أمام الحكومة العراقية حتى لا نتهم بالإرهاب، وخصوصا بعد خروج المحتل سنناضل سلميا حتى نغير الوضع في العراق. لذلك نحن لا نستعمل السلاح.
Do you think Article 4 is sometimes being interpreted too broadly? There are complaints that this article of the Constitution is being used to arrest people, activists, pro-democracy demonstrators.
I could assure you and confirm, we never arrest somebody due to his opinion or where he's demonstrating in Tahrir Square, unless there is a crime record against him.
But lately, Iraqi security forces have blocked the streets leading to Tahrir Square, deterring dozens of activists who regularly attend the demonstrations from entering.
But I think freedom of expression is guaranteed here in Iraq. But don't deny that Iraq is in the red threat, is under a great challenge and the threat from the terrorists. And you could find out those who kill the people, where from they are coming.
Next week, in the conclusion of this Fault Line special, we travel to Fallujah, where alarming rates of birth defects in newborn babies are being linked to the US assaults on the city. And we cross into the Kurdish north, where the promise of a bright future is falling short of expectations. After almost a decade, the US war in Iraq is over. From Basra to Baghdad, a new balance of power has emerged. But many people are living in precarity, and there are signs that mistakes made during the occupation are taking on a second life. In this second part of a special series, Fault Lines continues our journey across Iraq, from south to north, to take the pulse of a country and its people after the Americans. Our next destination is the only city in Iraq where victory celebrations were held as the last US soldier left the country. Fallujahs protested the US military presence in their city from the beginning of the occupation. And when the mutilated bodies of 4 American contractors were strung up on this bridge across the Euphrates in 2004, Fallujah's fate was sealed. What followed were 2 of the largest assaults of the entire war, with US Marines using devastating firepower to bombard the city into submission. The bloody campaigns had a profound effect on the residents of Fallujah.
يعني كان في تشوهات اسقاط يعني ابد يعني نسبه يوميه 10 12 هاي نسبه وهذا دينا الخمور هاي هذا كله.
Being told that these graves are actually for people who are still dying as a result of the fighting that happened back in 2004. These are the graves of babies who've died and having birth defects and other diseases.
Nine-year-old Hamed cannot speak, eat or walk on his own. His 2 younger siblings are buried in what Fallujahs call Martyrs Cemetery.
أنا بصراحة بالبداية قلت إذا هذا حالته هيك يعني وأثر الساعة قلت ما أترك الأطفال بس حرام ما إحنا ديننا ما يسمح لنا أن نقطع الذرية فجوني أطفال 2 الأول مات رأسا والثاني تشوه خلقي وندفنوا 2 مقبرة الشهداء.
When he was born, just months after the US-led invasion, Hamed seemed healthy. But after the sieges of 2004, doctors diagnosed him with brain atrophy. There's no question in his father's mind as to the cause.
أكدوا الأطباء مو بس حالة حامد، حالات هواية. الأسلحة المتنوعة اللي يستخدمها الأمريكان داخل المدينة الفسكور الأبيض وأنواع أخرى محرمة دوليا.
Hamed's parents dread the future that lies ahead for him here in Fallujah.
ماكو إمكانية علاجه داخل القطر وأكدوا هذا الشيء ومليت من عنده ما.
It is not an easy situation. You have to have a child with anomaly and you have no money to treat him. You have to watch him until he died or until he grew up with this anomaly. You can imagine.
In the neonatal ward at Fallujah General Hospital, Dr. Samira Alani has grown used to seeing babies born with cancers and congenital malformations.
Both hands are abnormal, it's only 4 fingers, not only missing, also it's abnormal shape.
Zain Jassim is 24 days old. During the siege in 2004, her mother Sadia was living in a village on Fallujah's outskirts.
But it is not serious, we have more serious cases.
Like many residents of Fallujah, Dr. Alani fled the worst of the fighting in 2004. When she returned, she and her colleagues were immersed in treating the injuries and trauma in its wake. Then they started seeing a new crisis emerge.
The incidence of birth defect not as we used to see before. We are facing these defects nearly daily.
Now she documents every case she sees. She has hundreds of pictures and video clips saved on her laptop of newborns with cleft palates, deformed limbs, cancers, enlarged and atrophied brains.
Congenital heart defects are at the top of the list of our defects. We have many cases of heart defects.
The misshapen hearts are harder to detect, and those babies are often miscarried, stillborn, or die shortly after birth. In a year-long survey Alani conducted at the hospital, she found 147 incidents of congenital malformation per 1,000 births. about 5 times the international norm. And in another study, she and her colleagues found higher than normal levels of enriched uranium and mercury in the hair of parents of children born with congenital malformations and cancers.
How do you explain that?
Something happened. As you know, uranium is not present in the kids' toys, and it's not. We didn't buy it from the shops. There's something happened in the city.
Well, everybody knows what happened in the city, don't they?
Actually, we need more investigations. We need our DNA have to be examined. Our chromosomes have to be examined. You know what happened in Japan after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You hear about what happened years after that.
Study by study, Alani is trying to confirm beyond a shadow of a doubt what people in Fallujah are convinced is true. That there's a causal link between the weapons used by US forces in 2004, the amounts of enriched uranium in their bodies, and the alarming rise in numbers of sick and malformed children here.
My personal experience, although I don't want to talk about it, it is so harmful. But one of my brothers have lost 2 kids because of anomalies. Year after 2010, 2011. Yeah.
After the US assaults on Fallujah, many of the foreign fighters fled north and set up camp in the city of Mosul. I used to live there until Al-Qaeda-linked groups moved in. While the violence has dropped significantly from its peak in 2006, civilian casualty rates across Iraq are on the rise again. Since I left in 2004, Mosul has been under siege from car bombings and assassinations of government officials. Governor Athil al-Nujayfi's predecessor was killed in one of those attacks. He blames the Americans for Mosul's plight, and he says it's taking on new dimensions.
The American makes a lot of mistakes in Iraq, not just to put Al-Qaeda and to fight here, but also in the how to govern Iraq. They leave Iraq, but they give Iraq to Iran. Iran cannot enter Iraq like this if not the American is here.
Nujayfi says his forces have made great strides to rid his city of Al-Qaeda.
أعتقد أن القاعدة الآن هي شيء يعني خيالي أكثر منه شيء حقيقي. هناك من يحاول أن ينشر المخاوف من القاعدة أو من قوة القاعدة في الموصل، وأنا واثق أنه ليس هناك قوة حقيقية.
But with armed police escorting us to our next destination, it's clear that fear still remains. Mosul's streets are eerily quiet, and there's a sense that the violence for which the city is notorious is never far away. The family I'm about to meet protected me from that violence, and this is the first time I'll have seen them since their youngest son and the Reuters photographer whose work is on exhibit here was killed by US soldiers.
He said, I want to hear what you feel when you heard when Namir is killed.
Well, I was very sad to hear that. I was in Doha and we saw the story appear on the Reuters wire. So I called you, I think, at that time, and I asked you to call Nabil because I couldn't get through to... I think Nabil was in Syria.
Yeah, Nabil is behind you.
Namir's older brother Nabil was in charge of the Reuters operation in Mosul. We used to be a team. The three of us travelled around together, reporting on the growing insurgency turning Mosul's streets into a bloodbath.
2003, 2004 is good.
Yeah.
Not like now.
Yeah.
And not like in 2007.
Yeah.
Very difficult. You leave Mosul in...
just when it was starting to
April.
get bad, yeah.
In April, I think.
Yeah, you saved me. Yeah.
As the situation deteriorated, Namir was moved from Mosul, but he continued to document life under occupation and the violence it had unleashed.
مجموعة الصور التي وثقها نمير
هي لتاريخ العراق منذ أن جاء الاحتلال. هناك تاريخ أسود نتج عنه صور كثيرة من الدمار والقتل والانفجارات والموت الذي جلبه الاحتلال، ولكن برغم هذا الجحيم الذي كان، فالحياة كانت مستمرة في العراق. فصور نمير أثبتت أن هناك تاريخا أسود وأبيض.
Within 3 years, Namir was killed by US forces in Baghdad. His death captured forever on video shot by the US military and eventually leaked to the public by WikiLeaks.
Come on, fire!
And then Namir was still alive.
Yes.
And then he started running.
Yes, but the pilot keep fire. He kept fire for killed Namir. كل من فقد عزيزا يشعر أن هذه حالة صعبة، فهي لحظة موجعة جدا، وهو ألم لن يزول، هو باقي في القلب لن يزول. ما خلفته أمريكا هو شعب مهدد بالعمليات المسلحة، شعب كان يعد لحمة واحدة في السابق.
Less than an hour's drive from Mosul, the notion of Iraq as one fabric has now all but disintegrated. The prospect of Kurdish autonomy has been a fault line cutting across the north since Iraq's borders were drawn. But when I was based here, it still at least looked like the same country.
Now it looks like a different planet, and that seems to be the master plan that the Kurdish authorities have. Massive foreign investment and regeneration and infrastructure projects transforming the way these cities look.
Kurdish leaders established their own regional government when a US-sponsored no-fly zone was set up here after the First Gulf War. And they welcomed US forces during the 2003 invasion. In the years that followed, Washington lavished political and financial support on Kurdish leaders, billing the region as tomorrow's Iraq today, an example of how a liberated Iraq could look. So if there's one place where the US can be proud of its legacy in Iraq, it should be here. And on the surface at least, the future seems brighter than ever. It's a bit surreal to see the architecture transformed and major international chains selling goods at Western prices. And it doesn't entirely make sense. Most Iraqi Kurds earn only around $400 a month.
These malls are full of people, but it seems like those actually doing the shopping aren't Kurds from this region. It's Iraqi Arabs who've travelled up from Baghdad or the rest of the country, and tourists who've come in from Turkey and even Iran.
While Iranian influence may be expanding in the south, Turkey's footprint here is growing by the day. Iraq has become Turkey's second largest trading partner. Most of that trade is with the Kurdish region. After years of animosity, economic potential seems to have won out over Turkey's antagonism toward Iraqi Kurds and their dream of independence. And the Kurds appear to have found a new patron. From constructing the roads to rebuilding the souk, signs of the deepening ties are everywhere. We even bumped into the Turkish consul in town for a visit.
How would you describe the state of the relationship today? Has it changed a lot over the last few years?
Well, yes, and every other day, every passing day, it's getting better. I have to admit that, no one in Turkey ever imagined that our relations with Iraq, and especially with this region, would become so excellent.
The Turkish company building on this site has some of the biggest contracts with the municipal authorities. But 90% of the workers here are from Turkey. So not everyone's feeling the benefits of Erbil's boom.
بس كابا مثلا بنغلاديش يعني تركيا عرب ده كابا مثلا ما جاب تصاورقي ايش نادنا
يعني واتساكا خلق همو حكومات باريس زورا يعني جياني خلشي دابينكا جياني خلق دابينكا سوكا او داها كذا كردستان هي يعني لبوتزهيا زوزو زياده لخدمه يعني خدمتي خلق كامله.
The Kurds have always been strong supporters of their own political leaders and the struggle for self-determination that they have represented. When I was here 5 years ago, I never used to hear the levels of frustration with the Kurdish leadership that we're hearing now. And as we travel from Erbil to Sulaymaniyah, that discontent becomes even louder. The families who've been living in this building have been told they have to leave. The government is making them move to the city limits so that this area can be redeveloped. They say they don't have the means to build homes there.
يا بيبشي بحرالي نابي شي ولا مسؤولية ما صار شي بياشتي خلق داجي كي خلق بوجي خلق بقر بي بمعنى أبي بش بس ولا قاعد دراجان عند واحد فوق ولا كبابي خوار بربامي كله تيو تانا فوق ميديا ما عندوش يا مدرسة ما كوا خلص يلا دينار لقال درو.
There's a growing perception that the money flowing into the region is ending up in the pockets of a small business class, all of them politicians and party men. A year and a half ago, frustration here in Sulaymaniyah boiled over. It was February 2011, and inspired by people's uprisings in Tunisia and Egypt, Kurdish activists took to the streets against government corruption and repression, launching a protest of thousands that lasted 63 days.
لبروا إما بناي بس ما ناوي إما جادو بردو سيران مصطفى ما ناوي أوي كنشي أمولات خميتي أوي كنشي أمولات دوايكا تنها أويك عسادي ببين تنها أويك الثروة والساماني أم ميلتا بقرته بو ميلاد نشأت الجيفاني شوار كسور لم هرمدا نشأت الجيفاني أوانيكا خواني كرد خوان يرشد.
On the first day, government security forces opened fire on demonstrators who had surrounded political party offices and were throwing stones. Dozens were wounded. One man was shot dead. Over the next 2 months, government forces killed at least 9 more protesters. Among them, Zahir Mahmoud Iman's 14-year-old son, Sorku.
ساعات دو 20 دقيقة هنان درو بردين جوري چاوديري لجوري چاوديري چون بولاي سرداني مكر خو كركانم همو بدياري وين بو بساعات دونيو دليل اللي كرت.
To date, no legal action has been taken to punish those responsible.
دود صلاتي كردي يكي بناوي بارتي ديمقراطي كردستان ونيكي بناوي يكيتي مسلماني كردستان أمانا أمدو طرفخ دست يعني سورة لخويني شهيد بوني كركاني إما
ممكن تندت زيادة روي تدابيروي كمافيا بلام قندلي هي كمكرتي هي.
The Speaker of the Kurdistan Regional Government, or KRG, tries to cast the anger as a sign of progress.
كارج طبيعي خلق توربي شو خلق روجانا برو بيشة ودسي بداية كاني خلق زيادة بي خلق برو تساوي زيادة دكريتو لقال همو قران كاريك بداية تازة ديت بيشة.
We've also been speaking to people who participated in the demonstration in 2011. We've spoken to the father of a man who was killed, shot dead in the demonstration. That doesn't add up to us.
يعني أول ما كنت لهم أصلا كان لأسي حكومة لأسي برلمان لأسي شعبي ولأسي أحزاب كان يشتغل لهم دزقا كان يعني أول مسألة كلا والله كفوزات وزبو كبلاماري مقرر دلا كتقلي كلا كشت جدا درستي كسيما يعني أول دكي طبعا.
But the Kurds have other worries. Tensions with the central government are escalating. Kurdish leaders have been signing development contracts with foreign oil companies, asserting it's their right to do what they please with resources in their territory. Baghdad says that's just not true.
The KRG, this is the Kurdish regional government, feel that they have the right to negotiate, sign and decide on the oil that is located in the region. They feel they have the right to sign these contracts. And this is where the real disagreement lies.
With their US allies gone, Iraqi Kurds are feeling less secure than when thousands took to the streets a year and a half ago demanding democratic reforms.
مالکی بە ناوی ناوبژیوانەوەیەتەوە هەموو یەکرێت ئێمە عەبوڵەیدانمان گرتووە بە خۆمانە لەسەر ئەم گەندەڵی و دزی و پیاوکوژی و نائازادیە لە پێناو ئەوەی ئەم تۆزەکیانەی کە بە درێژایی مێژووی کورد هیچی نەبووە ئەم تۆزەی هەیە نەفەوتێ.
But as Kurdish leaders defy Baghdad and broker deals for oil pipelines with Turkey, it seems they're betting that this new alliance will protect them, even if it costs them the promise of an independent Kurdistan.
حتى آزادی هەبێ دیموکراتیە بە عێراقیشی دیموکراتی ئەمە پێمان باشە بەشێک من لە عێراق بەڵام کاتێک کە عێراق کوردی نەوێ و بێوێ بە نظامێکی دیکتاتۆری یان فەردی حکمی کوردستان بکات کوردستان عێراق بگێتەوە بۆ سەدەمی دیکتاتۆری ئەو کاتی ملت خۆی قراردە چارمسێکی بخۆی خەتە بژێرەوە حتما ئەوسا ئێمەرگە ئەو نظامە نابین کە شێوێک لە شێوکە نظامی دیکتاتۆری سەدامی بێ بۆیە ئێمە لەسەر ئەساسی ئەوە ئیش دەکەین کە دەرگاکان لە هەموو لایەکان بکەینەوە لە هەموو لایەک دەرگاکان بکەین و عێلاقاتمان بە هەموو لایەک باش بێت.
If there's one man who epitomizes claims that Iraq is in danger of sliding back into authoritarian rule, it's fugitive Vice President Tariq al-Hashimi. The day after US troops left the country in December, Prime Minister Maliki issued an arrest warrant for Iraq's most senior Sunni politician. Accused of financing death squads targeting Shia, he fled to the Kurdish north to escape arrest. We caught up with him shortly before he left the country for Turkey.
My case is straightforward, sectarian, politically motivated. In no way Tariq al-Hashimi could be engaged in any sort of violence.
Hashimi says that his security guards have been detained and tortured into making false confessions against him. Members of his entourage show us photos they say are of one who died in custody. His body appears to show signs of torture.
And this is bone?
The judicial process has to be respected. And if Tariq al-Hashimi believes he is innocent, he should go to the court and prove that innocence. He cannot flee the country or sit somewhere and start trying to politicize the issue.
The drama is the most visible manifestation of a political crisis that threatens further fragmentation and Iraq's redescent into violent conflict. Hashimi says the charges are more evidence that the Prime Minister is consolidating power along sectarian lines.
The American deliberately penalized the Arab Sunnis and entertained the Shia communities and the Kurdish communities. I am happy that the Kurdish now establishing their semi-state in Kurdistan. They deserve it. But at the same time, the oppression against the Arab Sunni communities, in fact, making some sort of injustice.
No Sunni being attacked, no Shia being attacked by the government. They participate in the government. They are the main component of the country. But there is a political, I don't deny, there is a political differences.
The reality is that we don't have the real democracy in this country. It's a fake. And Iraq is moving towards a very dangerous situation. It's going to be a dictatorship, but in a sectarian way.
Throughout our journey across the country, from Basra to Erbil, from Najaf to Baghdad, Fallujah and Mosul, the post-occupation landscapes have varied. Every city unique, every stretch of road another distinct piece of Iraq. But in each place the people we've met have voiced similar things. Impatience at the lack of basic services and jobs, anger at political corruption, distrust of the regional powers that seem to have more influence over their destinies than they do, and deep, lingering bitterness about what invasion and 9 years of US presence here has created. That legacy, for nearly everyone that we've met, can be summed up in a single word: fear. Fear of the Prime Minister and his grip on power. Fear of government security forces and the armed groups, of sectarian politics and regional power struggles. Fear that the ghosts of the past will never stop haunting the present.
And if Iraq is going to continue in that way, it's going to be divided. And there will be a war before they divide it and after they divide it.